The neighbor from hell thought she could steal our house, but her own bad decisions came back to bite her hard when she ended up slapped with a $250,000 bill. Before we jump into the thick of it, let me introduce you to the main players. We'll call the entitled neighbor N from here on out and her spoiled son, D. There's also the previous owner of our house. We'll refer to him as L. He doesn't have a huge part in the story, but he's important enough to mention. One more thing before we really get rolling. From the day we bought this house up until now, it's been almost 16 years. So unless I specifically say otherwise, just know there were often big gaps of time between events. Alright, now for some background to set the stage. Most of this happened before we even bought the place. So, Anne owned a pretty large chunk of land not far from a popular recreational lake around here. When I say not far, I mean it's still a decent drive. Her road is actually the only way to reach a handful of lakefront properties, a couple of resorts, and the busiest boat dock on the side of the lake. Now, properties around here aren't so expensive that regular folks can't afford them, but there are definitely some high-end spots down the road where rich people are always cruising by. That'll matter later, trust me. Anyway, Marcia, that's Anne's real name, by the way, was sitting on all that land, and when her kids were grown, she decided to split it up into 5 fairly equal parts. One chunk she gave to her daughter, who somehow turned out to be a pretty decent human being, especially compared to the rest of the family. Another piece went to D, her son. She even built them both houses on their new properties, more or less customized to whatever they wanted. As for the last section of land, the one without her personal house on it, she built a little convenience store there. Yeah, that'll come back into the story too. Now, I don't know exactly why she did it, maybe to avoid any future family drama, but she actually handed over the property deeds to each kid outright. You can probably guess where this is headed. While the daughter stayed pretty respectable, D, or maybe I should call him irresponsible son, went completely off the rails. The guy was a nightmare for everyone around. He threw loud, obnoxious parties practically every night, keeping the whole neighborhood awake. The cops were getting called so often that they basically had someone sitting nearby on standby. Didn't help that Mommy Dearest kept paying all his bills, electric, water, garbage, you name it, it all went to her mailbox. All except one bill, that is, the property taxes. Since the property itself was in D's name, so were the taxes, and guess what? He didn't pay them. Ever. Maybe Anne just assumed he was taking care of it, or maybe she never thought about it. Either way, it didn't exactly come as a shock when the police finally showed up. What was a surprise was when D didn't come back, and his house ended up on the auction block. By that time, the house was a wreck. Holes in the drywall, a giant hole in the living room floor that dropped straight into the garage/basement, and the kitchen subfloor was rotted out and had to be completely replaced. Mud stains all over the walls. Basically, thanks to his wild lifestyle, the place was considered unlivable by any bank standards. That meant only someone who could pay cash could even think about buying it. Enter L. L wasn't one of those flashy house flippers you see on TV, he was just a retired guy who liked staying busy. Flipping houses was more of a hobby than a full-time gig for him. He'd pick up a busted-up house cheap at auction, fix it up himself, then sell it off. While he worked on one, he lived off the profits from the last sale. By the time he wrapped one up and started the next, he was usually scraping the bottom of that profit barrel. Any leftover cash just went into a modest emergency savings fund, nothing fancy. Now, my family and I were house hunting around then. We didn't have a huge budget, so we weren't looking at anything fancy. When we stumbled across this house listed online, it looked perfect. Right size, great neighborhood, and right down the road from the lake, which was a dream for us since we love fishing and boating. The only thing that made us nervous was that the price wasn't listed yet. Still, we figured it wouldn't hurt to drive by and have a look. When we pulled up, we spotted L outside, working on the place. We stopped to say hi and asked about the price. L explained he was still fixing it up and hadn't officially put it on the market yet. The realtor just posted it online to save time when the house was ready to sell. We ended up sitting down and chatting for a while, just friendly conversation. We told him we'd love to buy it as is for a fair price, even with the work left to do. At that point, he had about half the renovations done. We explained how much the place meant to us and that we wanted it to be our forever home. L was super nice about it, but he turned us down, saying he already had a bunch of offers and felt it was only fair to let it hit the market at full price when it was finished. We thanked him, gave him our number, and asked him to call us if he ever changed his mind. He promised he would. A little less than 2 weeks later, out of the blue, we got a call from him. L said his sister had gotten seriously ill out of state and he needed to leave ASAP to be with her. He didn't have the time or the patience to finish the house anymore. He offered to sell it to us for a reasonable price, but warned that it wasn't up to code yet. We jumped at the chance and immediately scrambled to line up financing. Luckily, a realtor friend of ours had a few contacts and helped us find a bank willing to give us a loan, but with one major condition. We had just 2 weeks to bring the house up to code. If we missed that deadline, they could default the loan and put the house back up for auction. When we explained the situation to L, he offered to help however he could. He couldn't stick around to physically work on the place, but he took the time to walk us through exactly what needed fixing, what would meet the minimum code requirements, and even gave us rough estimates of time, cost, and effort. L even found another way to help us out. We ended up getting a loan for twice what he was asking for the house, and he handed the extra money right back to us so we could pour it into repairs. Thanks to all the work he'd already done, the house was this close to being up to code. Honestly, we probably could have handled the last bits ourselves, but just to be safe, we rounded up a few good friends and knocked the job out in half the time. Getting it up to code was just the beginning, though. There was still a mountain of work ahead of us. We spent the next few months ripping out floors and subfloors, rewiring old electrical lines, patching up busted drywall, and tearing down layers of disgusting, half-rotted wallpaper that had been slapped straight onto the drywall. You get the idea, it was a full-on gut job. We poured our blood, sweat, and money into turning that wreck into a real home. Finally, after months of backbreaking work, the place was ready. Sure, it still had a few minor problems that we'd tackle little by little over time, but it was finally livable and it was ours. We were still in the middle of moving boxes when Marcia, the neighbor from hell herself, made her grand entrance. Now, while we'd been scrambling to buy the house, Elle had warned us more than once about Marcia and her entitled attitude. He really hammered it home, but at the time we couldn't figure out what the big deal was. When she first showed up, Marcia was all smiles and politeness, super sweet even. We thought maybe Elle had been exaggerating a little. Then it happened. As we were wrapping up our first friendly conversation, Marcia, still smiling, still sounding so compassionate, told us that our house was actually her house. She said we had 50 days to pack up and leave. She made it sound like she was doing us a favor by telling us nicely, saying she felt so bad that we'd been scammed, but that legally the house was hers and Elle never had the right to sell it. I can't even explain the sinking feeling we had in that moment. We'd heard horror stories about housing scams before, people losing everything, and suddenly it felt like we were the next victims. We kept our cool, thanked her for letting us know, and said we'd talk to the bank and to Elle and get everything sorted out. First stop was the bank. They confirmed that Elle absolutely was the legal owner when he sold it to us. Next, we spoke to the realtor who backed up the same thing. Elle himself told us that Marcia had accused him of stealing the house multiple times before, right after he bought it fair and square at auction, and that she'd been harassing him nonstop ever since. Every person we spoke to gave us the same story. We even went down to the courthouse to double-check ourselves, and sure enough, our names were right there on the deed. It was during all of this that we started hearing even more stories from other neighbors, mainly about D, the spoiled son. Not long after, N, Marcia's real name, by the way, came knocking again, asking when we'd be moving out. We stood firm and explained that we weren't going anywhere. We owned the house, legally and properly, and while we understood how painful it must have been for her family to lose it because of her son's mistakes, it wasn't our fault. We told her we were sorry for what she'd gone through, really, we meant it, but there was no way we were handing over the home we'd bought with our hard-earned money and poured months of work into. Realizing we weren't clueless, N launched into a long, teary story about how the property had been in her family for generations and how Elle had stolen it while they were distracted dealing with D's arrest. We asked her flat out why they didn't just bid for the property at auction if it meant so much. Especially considering we paid Elle only around $55,000 for it and he still managed to make a small profit after all the repairs he did. She told us they refused to pay for something that already belonged to them, saying the auction was a sham and the property should have been given back to them for free. We apologized again but told her firmly that we couldn't and wouldn't take a loss on the house, not after everything we'd put into it. Still trying to be reasonable, we offered to sell her the house for $150,000, which, considering the location and the work done, was still a huge discount compared to its true market value. After buying it for $55,000, sinking another $36,000 into materials and months of hard labor, we figured $150,000 was more than fair. Truth be told, we were even willing to go down to $150,000 if she tried negotiating in good faith. Instead, she came back with a counteroffer, $42,000. She said she shouldn't have to pay it all for something that was rightfully hers, but she was being nice by offering anything at all. We told her flat out that $40,000 wasn't even close. She got huffy and said she'd add another $12,000 out of the kindness of her heart to cover the repairs we'd done. When we pointed out that $50,000 was exactly what we'd paid Elle, she completely lost it. She started screaming that we were liars and thieves, claiming the house was still a dump and not worth anything near that much. Hearing her trash talk the home we'd bled, sweated, and cried over after everything we'd put into it, that was the last straw. We politely but firmly told her to leave and that we wouldn't sell her the house even if she offered double the market price. Naturally, she didn't take it well. She hurled every insult she could think of as she stomped out the door. After that, she started spreading nasty rumors about us around the neighborhood, saying we stole her house and God knows what else. At first, we laughed it off, thinking nobody would actually believe her nonsense. Then one day, a man we'd never met before pulled up into our driveway, waving a gun and shouting at us to get out now. Turns out we had heard of him. He was a self-proclaimed peacekeeper around the neighborhood. Most folks around here liked the guy, said he was usually a fair and reasonable man. Living in a rural area full of colorful characters, some a little outside the law, it wasn't the worst thing to have someone keeping a bit of order. But man, we were about to find out firsthand just how messy things could really get. Truth be told, the guy actually did work hard to keep the neighborhood as peaceful as he could, a whole lot more than the cops did most of the time, honestly. Just so you know, our neighborhood's pretty much split into two main parts. One side's mostly older, retired folks, real nice and quiet, with everybody getting along just fine. The other side? Well, that's where the more, let's just say, less law-abiding crowd lives deeper into the woods where there aren't many eyes watching. We lived right on the edge of the peaceful side with about a mile of woods and farmland separating us from the wilder part. So when we heard about this so-called peacekeeper and based on everything we'd been told, we figured it was probably the same guy who showed up with the gun. We decided to test that theory. We told him straight up we didn't know what was going on but invited him in for a beer and a sit-down to clear the air. We said he could bring his gun if it made him feel better, but we'd be bringing ours too. Around here, that's just normal. Heck, we have more gun stores than dollar stores if that tells you anything about our town. Carrying a gun around here doesn't mean you're looking for trouble. It's just a way of saying, hey, if things go south, I can take care of myself. Now, if someone actually pointed a gun at you, that's a whole different ballgame, but this guy never did. Anyway, back to the story. He agreed to the beer, and after a few hours of just talking things out and explaining everything, he ended up apologizing for the misunderstanding. Said he figured it was something like that all along but got caught up in the rumors and overreacted. Promised it wouldn't happen again. He even thanked us for buying the place, said the whole neighborhood got a lot quieter once, as that's what he called D moved out. No more loud music or drunk and high teenagers stumbling down the middle of the road at night, almost getting themselves run over. We all had a good laugh about it before he shook our hands and headed on his way. Now, here's where things start getting interesting, the real reason Mr. Lawson believed those wild rumors about us so easily in the first place. It's kind of a side story, but it's a major turning point in how things started unraveling for Marcia. And yeah, some of these events do overlap with the next part of the main story, but it's important, so bear with me. Remember how I mentioned Marcia had split off a quarter of her land to build a little convenience store? Well, that store was hugely popular around here. Mostly because of the location, right smack in the middle of everything, not because of the prices, which were ridiculous, or the customer service, which was, frankly, terrible. Basically, the best you could expect was a grumbled thank you as you were walking out the door, if they bothered. On the plus side, if you found moldy food, they would give you a refund, so, you know, that's something. Anyway, the only real reason the store stayed so busy was because it was the only game in town. If you didn't want to drive all the way into town for groceries or essentials, Marcia's place was just a quick hop away. Even we shopped there pretty often, putting aside all the drama, I mean, it was practically next door. Their little store built up a huge amount of goodwill with folks around here. People loved having it nearby, and God help anyone who tried to threaten its existence. Back then, people still thought Marcia and her family were decent folks, so when she started running her mouth and spreading rumors, people tended to listen. The whole "they stole my house" nonsense didn't gain much traction. Everyone knew that was a stretch. But all the smaller, pettier rumors? Those stuck around. Not that anyone cared enough to act on them. Even if every rumor about us had been true, there were a lot worse things people around here had done. Still, most folks avoided us for a long while, mainly because they didn't want to get on Marcia's bad side and risk being banned from her precious little store. So they just pretended we didn't exist. Fast forward a few years and Dee finally got out of prison. With nowhere else to go, Marcia let him move back in. But she didn't want him crashing at her house, so she set him up in an apartment above the convenience store on one big condition: no wild parties. She even waived the rent. All he had to do was help run the store whenever she was too busy. Which wasn't all that often, honestly. But even after everything that had happened, Marcia still hadn't learned her lesson. While Dee was manning the cash register, he started double-charging people and pocketing the extra money. We caught onto it pretty quick after being overcharged a few times ourselves, and each time, when we went back to get a refund, they'd brush it off, blaming the broken register. After seeing the pattern enough times, we finally decided to give Marcia a heads up. We figured, despite all the bad blood, it was still the right thing to do, and we honestly didn't want anything to happen to the store. But instead of thanking us, Marcia basically told us, in the nicest way possible, to screw off. So, being the good neighbors we are, we did exactly that. We also quietly mentioned it to a few of the friends we'd managed to make over the years. Bringing homemade Christmas cookies to people every year goes a long way, let me tell you. Even though they didn't believe us at first, they thanked us for letting them know. Word got around pretty quick after that. Not long after, Mr. Lawson showed up at our driveway again, this time without the drama. By then, he'd gotten wise to the fact that most of the nasty stories floating around about us were pure garbage. We'd actually gotten to know him a bit by then, sharing beers now and then, chatting about local gossip and neighborhood goings-on. He made a point of staying in touch with just about everybody in the area, dropping by at least once a year to make sure everything stayed calm and neighborly. He didn't like the idea of trouble brewing under the surface, so he took it upon himself to keep the peace in his own way before things could get out of hand. And honestly, pretty much everyone, including us, really appreciated the way he handled it. Thanks to Mr. Lawson keeping a watchful eye on the neighborhood, it was the kind of place where you could let your kids walk all the way down to the lake, even through the rougher patches, and not worry too much. That said, he absolutely hated the idea that we were spreading rumors about our neighbors, especially about their precious little convenience store. He told us straight up that he had already talked to them, and from what he heard, it was all just a misunderstanding. Faulty register, no funny business. He warned us that if we didn't want real problems, we needed to shut those rumors down immediately. We wanted to show him proof. God knows we wanted to, but we knew it wouldn't matter. He liked Marcia a whole lot more than he liked us, and if she said it was a mistake with the register, that's the version he was going to stick with. So we did the only thing we could. We apologized for any trouble, explained that we were just trying to protect the few friends we had managed to make, and promised we'd let it go. He accepted the apology, gave us a final warning to keep our mouths shut, and left without much more to say. From that point on, we decided we'd only shop at that store if we absolutely had no other choice. And for a while, that was that. But things have a funny way of working themselves out. A couple more years went by, and slowly but surely the cracks started to show. Even though Mr. Lawson had personally gone around telling everyone that the rumors were lies, made up by us because of some feud with Marcia, folks started getting wise on their own. They started paying closer attention to their receipts after shopping at the store. And sure enough, they began spotting the same shady patterns we had seen. Double charges, weird totals, money missing. Meanwhile, Dee, that no-good son of hers, kept pocketing money like it was his personal piggy bank, and Marcia, instead of putting a stop to it, chose to bury her head in the sand and smear anyone who pointed it out. Now, the thing about tiny country stores like that, they live and die by the regulars who live nearby. Sure, they pull in a bunch of money during the summer when vacationers and weekenders flood in, but it's not enough to carry them through the cold, empty winters. And then it finally happened. Mr. Lawson put two and two together, and man, was he mad. We could hear him from our porch next door, absolutely laying into Dee, cussing him out up one side and down the other. It was one of the most satisfying moments of my life. But he didn't stop there. Oh no. That very same day, he went door to door all across the neighborhood, telling everyone what had been going on, even carrying around a stack of receipts as proof for anyone who wanted to see for themselves. Now, if there was one person in the neighborhood who was trusted even more than Marcia had been, it was Mr. Lawson. Within 48 hours, he had completely demolished their reputation. Almost overnight, the whole neighborhood stopped shopping at Marcia's store. Sure, they still did okay during the summer months when tourists and snowbirds came through, folks who didn't know any better. But once winter rolled around and those crowds disappeared, they started hemorrhaging money. After 2 brutal winters, They had to shut the store down during the colder months. They simply couldn't afford to keep it open. Problem was, every fall they had to throw away almost 90% of their leftover stock and completely restock come springtime. And as you can imagine, doing that year after year wasn't exactly sustainable. 3 more years of scraping by like that, and they finally had to close the store for good. That's when Marcia's standing in the neighborhood really started to crumble. And for us, it was the beginning of a fresh start. People finally started treating us like real neighbors. They stopped ignoring us like we were some kind of plague. We didn't have to work overtime just to get a wave or a friendly nod. But as sweet as that victory was, it was only the beginning of Marcia's downfall. Now, before I get to the real climax of the story, I need to lay a little more groundwork. Yeah, I know this is starting to feel like a whole dang book. But stick with me, it's worth it. Let me tell you something about Marcia. She is the nosiest human being I have ever met. We can't even step outside without her peeking through her windows or finding some excuse to wander outside. Walking her dog, picking up non-existent trash, pulling imaginary weeds. Anything to get a better look at what we're doing. It's not like we had anything to hide, but still, it's creepy having somebody constantly spying on you, especially someone you're not exactly on good terms with. We had plans to set up a little pool and maybe even a hot tub in the backyard, and the last thing we wanted was to have her gawking at us while we tried to relax. So we started looking into putting up a privacy fence. Wanting to be good neighbors, even though she didn't deserve it, we gave her a heads up about our plan. Predictably, she threw a fit. She absolutely refused, didn't want us putting up a fence at all. We told her, as politely as we could, that we were putting up a privacy fence whether she liked it or not. Still, trying to be considerate, we offered to work with her on things like the color and design, so she wouldn't have to stare at something she hated every day, since clearly staring at our property was her favorite pastime. Even after all the garbage she put us through, we still went out of our way to be as neighborly as possible. Anyway, before we built anything, we wanted to make sure there were no disputes about property lines. So, just to be safe, we planned to put the fence a full foot inside our own property, no questions, no drama. Back then, this was still before Dee got out of jail. We went down to the courthouse and paid for a full copy of the deed and a property map. And boy, were we shocked. Turns out about a third of our land was being claimed by Marcia. She had a little shed on it, plus a garden. See, there's this line of trees running through our property, and because of the weird shape of our lot, kind of a half hexagon or trapezoid, it's not as simple as a neat little box. Weird property lines are pretty common out here. Anyway, the trees made it look like her property went further than it really did, and she'd been acting like the other side of the tree line was hers. When we brought this up to her, she absolutely lost it, calling us liars and thieves and every name in the book. We honestly didn't care all that much about that little patch of land. We'd lived here for years thinking it was hers anyway. So, trying to be reasonable, we offered to either sell her that chunk or swap it for a little slice of her land that would have made our yard way easier to manage. But nope. Marcia flat out refused. Said she would never pay for something that was rightfully hers, and she wouldn't even think about giving us an inch of her land, especially not after we stole the house from her. And just like that, a full-blown property dispute was born, one that's still simmering to this day. Now, a little something you need to know about where we live. Like I mentioned before, it's a really rural area, and out here, property lines aren't always nice and tidy. A lot of deeds are ancient, going back hundreds of years. And instead of saying something clear like 250 feet north or 350 feet west, they describe property boundaries by using temporary landmarks, stuff like the big oak tree or the large rock by the stream. Problem is, those trees and rocks either vanished a century ago or could be describing any number of things. So yeah, to say there are a lot of property disputes around here would be putting it mildly. Because of all that, and because even tiny slices of land can sometimes be worth a crazy amount of money, our state has some really strict laws around property disputes, surveyors, and how all that's handled. Side note, just a few years ago, some guy around here actually won a property dispute against a massive corporation over just 0.12 acres of land. Made over $1 million off that sliver of dirt. Anyway, back to the story. Even though our property lines were pretty clean-cut, since Marcia herself had created them not that long ago, the laws still applied and they were no joke. Especially when it came to surveyors. See, they had to be extremely careful. If a surveyor here even made an honest mistake by a few feet, they didn't just get slapped with a fine, they lost their license for life. And not just that, they had to notify every single client they'd ever worked for in the past 11 years, refund all their money, and then pay for a second independent survey if requested. Plus, the clients could sue for any damages caused by bad property lines, including back rent if someone else had been using land that technically belonged to them. And if the surveyor was caught taking a bribe or getting blackmailed, oh buddy, then the one who bribed them got stuck with all the damages, legal fees, the whole ugly mess. Because of all that risk, most surveyors absolutely refuse to touch anything that even smells like a property dispute. So when Marcia and us started butting heads over the land, it wasn't as easy as making a phone call and hiring someone. It became a nightmare and an expensive one too. Unfortunately, before we could find a solid surveyor ourselves, Marcia somehow beat us to the punch. She must have found someone and either sweet-talked or bribed them because they did a survey that conveniently matched exactly how she claimed the property lines were. Well, almost. There was one tiny little hiccup. According to their survey, our property line runs to within about a foot of her house. Oh, the fun we had teasing her about that little detail. Still, that was nothing compared to the chunk of land she was outright trying to steal from us. And every time we did manage to find a potential surveyor willing to consider the job, Marcia would magically appear super friendly and casually drop into the conversation that she had already had her part surveyed and that there might be a dispute going on. That was enough to spook just about everyone. And knowing what was at stake for them, I honestly couldn't blame them. Oh, and did I mention? The land markers the bank's surveyor put down when we first bought the place? Yeah, those mysteriously vanished before we even moved in. Funny how that works, huh? Anyway, at this point, the cost to get an honest surveyor out here, assuming we could even find one willing to touch it, would probably run us more than the disputed land was even worth. Every quote we've gotten has been sky high. And honestly, I get it, those surveyors would basically be putting their entire careers and livelihoods on the line over this mess. Still, we're slowly saving up, hoping we can eventually get someone reputable out here to settle it once and for all. And that, my friends, brings us right up to just a few months ago, the real climax of this whole saga. Sorry for dragging you through all that backstory, but it sets the stage for what's about to happen. So, a few months back, a really nasty storm rolled through Labia. And one of the trees on the disputed part of the property, right by the roadside, got ripped up and came crashing down. It didn't just fall harmlessly either. It smashed straight through a chunk of our neighbor's property across the street, and even worse, it totaled someone's brand new sports car that just happened to be driving by at the wrong time. Thank God nobody was hurt, but the cleanup took days. Just enough time for something lovely to show up in our mailbox. A bill. For over $250,000. Yep, you read that right. The bill was literally more than what our entire house and property were worth after all the work we put into it. Now for a little extra context, in case you're not familiar. Where we live, most homeowners' insurance won't cover damage your property does to someone else's property. That's typically on you. And if a tree on your land falls onto the road, public property, and causes an accident, you are 100% on the hook for it if you could have reasonably prevented it, like cutting it down beforehand. So when we got that massive bill from some rich guy's insurance company over his totaled car, we immediately picked up the phone. We politely explained that the tree wasn't on our property. They said they'd look into it and get back to us. About a week later, a new letter showed up, this time with a copy of the deed and a detailed property map attached. And there it was, clear as day. The fallen tree circled in red, and according to their paperwork, it was smack dab on our land. They told us we had 50 days from the first notice to pay up or they'd be hauling us into court. At that point, we had about 2 weeks left, give or take. Vagina. We picked up the phone again, called the insurance company, and calmly explained once more that the tree was not on our property. At first, the agent got a little snippy in much nicer words than I'll use here, basically saying that you'd have to be brain-dead to believe that tree wasn't on our land. He said there was no way, no matter how off the survey map might look, that anyone would seriously think the property line was that wrong. We didn't argue. We just gave him the number of the surveyor that Anne had hired herself. The agent let out a sigh like he already knew this was going to be a headache, said they'd follow up with the surveyor, and reminded us that unless they found solid proof backing our side, we'd still need to get that $200,000 ready, and soon. Well, funny thing, we never heard another word from them. Remember all those heavy consequences I mentioned earlier for a surveyor giving false results? Even if the guy was bribed by N, there's no way he could have been paid enough to make up for losing his license, refunding a decade's worth of clients, getting sued 7 ways to Sunday, and being blacklisted forever. The man would probably have to leave the country. So there was no chance he was gonna admit to anything shady and no way he was gonna give the insurance company different information than what he gave us and. Later, we called the insurance company again just to check in. The agent we spoke to actually sounded pretty cheerful reading through the notes. Because of confidentiality rules, they couldn't tell us too much, but they could tell us a few key things. First, Anne had officially disputed the responsibility, same as we did, claiming the tree wasn't on her property either. Second, the surveyor had confirmed the property lines with the insurance company, the very same lines that put the tree squarely on her land. And third, since we weren't disputing the survey and the surveyor had been hired by Anne herself, there was no reason at all for the insurance company to think the survey was false. Bottom line, Anne was now fully responsible for the damages. The agent couldn't say much more, but that was more than enough for us. Exactly what we figured would happen. The aftermath. So as you probably guessed from everything leading up to this, Anne wasn't exactly thrilled to cough up that kind of cash. But the reality was she could pay it. We don't know how much she had tucked away in savings, but it must have been enough because she paid off the bill without having to sell any more of her land, at least not yet. Since all this went down, we've kept pretty quiet about the property line mess. We're still thinking about saving up to hire a legit surveyor and officially take back the land she's squatting on, not because we need it, but because it's about principle at this point. As for Anne? Oh, you can just see it in her face every time she looks at us. She's furious that we didn't just roll over and hand everything to her. And honestly, it's hilarious. She got free land and she's still mad about it. LOL. At this point, she could try to start up rumors again, but they'd probably backfire badly. We've made real friends around here now, good folks who know the truth about her, especially after they found out Dee was stealing from everybody right under their noses while she stood by and did nothing. Anne's reputation is toast. She's stuck between a rock and a hard place, and we're just sitting back, watching the fires she started burn her world down. Honestly, can't wait to see what happens next. A little bonus story. Now, just for a little extra bit of fun. While we were still thinking about putting up a real privacy fence, we decided in the meantime to install an invisible dog fence. For anyone who's not familiar, it's basically a thin wire you bury underground that hooks up to a special collar your dog wears. If the dog gets too close to the boundary, the collar lets out a high-pitched beep that they really don't like. And if they keep going, it gives them a light shock, nothing painful, just a little buzz to turn them around. We were super cautious about it too. One of us even tested it first by walking over the wire while holding the collar. It didn't hurt, just felt like a weird tingle. The idea was to condition the dogs to respond to the beep so they'd never actually get shocked. We wanted our pups to enjoy running around the yard without being locked up in the house all day, especially since we couldn't afford a proper privacy fence yet. We installed the invisible fenceway inside our actual property lines, partly because the wire wasn't very long and partly because we didn't want the dogs getting anywhere near Marcia's side. Well, Marcia must have thought the wire marked where we were planning to put up a fence or something. Because one day she decided to accidentally mow over it with her electric lawnmower, even though it was more than 7 feet inside our land. Here's a little tip: electric mowers and buried electric wires do not mix well. She fried her mower completely, every electrical component ruined. She had to buy a brand new one. All because she wanted to be petty and run over what she thought was our fence markers. And the best part? Because it was so far inside our property line, she had no way of blaming us for it. She did try spreading a few rumors, but nobody bought it. It would have sounded so stupid that even she didn't push it too hard. She never asked us for a new mower, never sent a bill, never even mentioned it to us. I guess she knew exactly how we would have responded if she had, LOL. Anyway, that's the end of this crazy story. Hope y'all enjoyed it and stay tuned because I've got another wild one coming. Next time, I'll tell you about how my mom's malicious compliance ended up costing her company over $200 million and got her entire department shut down for good. But that's a story for another night. I'm heading to bed. Catch you later.